Here's the problem with sending Clinton's force up here. Of course, if you don't do this, the Continentals can swing around this way, so you have to leave a force over here. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be Clinton, but you have to send something that way. Continentals are beginning to turn the screws. You've got Sterling's wing coming down this way. That's going to give me an encircling capability, so I can stretch out and I can start hitting these units that are a little weakened. Likewise, I'm coming out of the woods here. Lee had a couple of points of command. One threw the artillery back into play. The other one is starting to turn Scott's brigade forward. The British position is beginning to look much, much more questionable at this point. We'll see. Their morale is much, much higher, so depending on what comes of it, we could. But I had too little protecting here, and it looks like I have too little here, and maybe a little too much here. The goal was to break through, but that didn't happen. So now the effort that I spent up there, the excess troops that could have been very, very valuable had I broken through, are now a sort of a waste, and I got to be very careful. But this is looking like an American victory. These counterattacks are turning out to be exceedingly effective, hitting flank attacks. Like I said, this is where this system really kind of starts causing casualties, is when you're starting to outflank the opponent and you get the disorder results. You get to slam into their, with the enfilades, etc. And especially in shock combat. Now, I've been playing incorrectly, and probably mainly to the British advantage, which is I have not been allowing, I didn't realize it was allowed, opportunity fire when you march against somebody for melee. So if you're shocking someone, they get a chance to shoot you as you're coming in after the reciprocal fire. This is very different from most systems, and I think probably a little weird, because I'm assuming that firepower was already baked into the shock combat table. It's very, very difficult for me to parse this rule book with all that bold print in it, and it's not a system I'm completely familiar with, and it's not a trivial system, so these things are not unlikely. So for example, I found the organization of this rule book just kind of sucks. It's not like, oh, there's not a better place, or gosh, there's a better place for this. But for example, the morale rules for shock combat, where would they? So the fact that if you're shocked from a flank, that you have to make a morale check. That was something I didn't know, but I just found that in roll, and I don't know if I've had to apply that, or I don't know if I should have been applying it before. I don't believe so. But the fact that it is means small units can smash into the flank of a stronger unit, and it's something that makes up for there not being a penalty, as far as I could find, for the enfilade fire. Yeah, well, that's only noted in the facing rules. Perfectly reasonable place for it if it's only going to be in one place, but there's no references into it. For whatever reason, when they decided to put bold print in these rule books, not only is that very distracting and annoying, and it's all you end up reading or something, that may be a personal problem, but they also reduced the amount of cross-references that they made into the rules. Somehow they thought that would be easier for the D&D type kids to understand. That made sense. That's the explanation I had with Napoleon's Art of War and some of the other simpler games, the Ragnarok, some of the Ares stuff. I don't understand why they decided to go with it here, but they really kind of lessened the old Dunnigan formula and made something right at the very end that I found less effective in general. And the cross references are important. You need those numbers. The heavier bold type, maybe it takes up a little bit more space. I don't know, because it's a larger point size and everything. And they couldn't afford as many references on the page. I don't know. Whatever happened, the rules editing went way downhill on the last, on this magazine issue, but also on some of the Areses and some of some of even the earlier S&Ts. Like I said, the Napoleon's Art of War are the ones that were intended to be simpler. Maybe it's more friendly to look at somehow. To me, it's not. It's harder to remember where things are. It's very hard to find things because of the lack of cross-references. There's some, it's just not as much. All right, anyway, what do we got? Well, we're back out of counters again. That's a disorder. But we've got Wayne beginning to punch his way forward. We've got a breakout happening here that's looking really ugly. We've got, yeah, the guns are gone, but we did manage to chase things off, and I think maybe neutralized some of the threat there. We'll see. I may have to, and I suspect I'm going to have to send the other column, which is supposed to be the right flank, this way. I invert the army, and this almost always happens because I absolutely need more troops over here. It may end up that we're fighting, that the Brits break through here, and they have their 2, and we have 2 here, instead of right now, which is 1, 2 here for the Brits, and 2 up here for the Americans. And at rallies, you gotta be careful. Artillery have larger minimum range fire zones than infantry do, which means that it's a 2 hex radius that they prevent things from disorganizing or from reorganizing. This guy may have been violated a couple of times, because the Brits may have been able to rally things in his minimum range fire zone when they wouldn't otherwise. And yeah, it's also opportunity fire is available there, I guess. Which is something that I've been screwing up with as well, if that's the case, because when you march up to artillery, moving from hex 2 to hex 1, you get shot at, which is similar to the Battles of the Age of Reason rules on the artillery. Artillery really do make a good defensive positioning, and I think I've been messing that one up. Here is, I don't think there's anything that specifically is opportunity fire. So then buried somewhere in fire combat, here it is. A unit may be immediately fired if it voluntarily exits a hex in an enemy minimum fire zone, which is not exiting the whole fire zone. And it's also changing formation and doing stuff like that in it, which I think applies to the artillery. So I've undervalued artillery. How much has that mattered? It's probably been a mixed bag, maybe slightly skewed toward the British. I'm not sure, because they did start with a cannon early, I think, Bill went. But you can see that Americans have lost a lot more cannons, which probably means more of theirs have been violated in this way by charging units and such, not that didn't get a shot. How much of an effect would it have? It's hard to tell. And chit failures are getting worse. Got tiddlywinks as disordered markers now. In addition to using other things again, I can dig up crap from another game. There's no question of that. I just feel like this is going to resolve itself one way or another pretty soon. I don't know, because I'd have to use something that doesn't quite match, no matter what. Yeah, I could probably dig up Wellington's victory, and it probably has different print markers that have the same meaning, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, this is actually a cannon that's been abandoned. Elsewhere, it doesn't look like the Brits are advancing here. It looks like they're still failing here. Brought some units forward. Luce is actually coming forward here to try to recover things. I don't think I'm going to be able to hold this forward position any longer. And that's kind of the beginning of the end if I'm pushed out of there. We'll see if I can contain this at all, but I don't think Luce is sufficient to do so. I don't think what's here is sufficient to prevent horrible things from happening when that other wing comes down. And if this can hold the line here, the third wing doesn't have to come up this way necessarily, which is kind of interesting, because then I could shift Wayne and Lafayette up to join Lee's wing over on the left flank and use the right and left wings in the main area of the battlefield. We'll see. Okay, during the Continental turn, over here at 4. More units marching in. I keep wanting to say Union. Blue, you know. So used to Civil War crap. Don't say the French turn. Over here, still they're kind of playing a delaying action over here. Here they're swooping out and really driving the Brits back. And I think the British response has to be, especially since we're clear now, with the exception of one unit, pull back. Send Erskine back, try to rally some of this shit, try to get the main force in here to drive those back, keep control here. It looks very, very unlikely that the Brits are going to be able to get a victory here. I've usually called this game somewhere around this point. I think usually with a British loss, because obviously I haven't figured things out as well. The only time that I didn't have a British loss was when the British were more cautious and didn't drive the Continentals back. And that was a game that was actually probably still contested. But I was so demoralized. It was the only time I played this opposed, like I said, against somebody competent or relatively competent. And I basically, was winning very heavily in the early stages of the game, and then got this whole Scots Brigade cut off, and that just demoralized me so much. But my opponent was trying to point out to me, it's not lost. You could lose that entire brigade and we'd be about equal on victory points. And I didn't get these reinforcements yet, so I didn't really have, that full Continental force on the board, which is more impressive than, just the numbers are more impressive. Their staying power isn't terribly good. The advanced guard here is my pick troops, basically. Anyway, with the victory point lead, though, which right now is quite high, 55 to 40. I think the Continentals could pretty much put it in their pocket. We're not sure that's going to happen, though. They may want to press on for a greater victory. Who knows? The British are able to pull away. It's really, really hard to pull away when you're engaged. It's really easy when you're not, but I'm abandoning someone. I could have tried to get him out of there. Probably should have. Probably sacrificing a lot of points by leaving him there. But, I don't know. Maybe he's a roadblock. That's a nice light infantry unit. Putting a little bit of hurt on the Continentals that crossed into the middle morass here. And then over here, still not terribly conclusive, but I've gotten the artillery out of the way. But it can just run back up because Maxwell is up there, able to rally it. And then the units along here, there's such an amount of force the British are trying to push their way through those woods with that they should make it through. But if they don't, by the time these things get there, they're in a lot of trouble. They're not going to make a budge there. And then the question is, well, if I do make it through there, can I do anything coming through the middle morass here? At the very least, I'll be threatening the rear of Scott and Dickinson or whatever. So I don't know. When the Brits begin to rationalize their line, a little bit of front here, some exposure there, trying to hold on to what we can. Oops. Yeah, this hasn't fallen into American hands yet. Erskine driving forces up. He smashed into Scott's flank and drove him back. Really, this position out here is pretty questionable, but the thing is, it's what I need to be able to do a hammer and anvil type thing, although the anvil is really weak. But at least it ties down some of the British activity and effort. Up here, the Brits are beginning to force their way through. We marched into there. I'm really terrified of trying to charge into the woods, though, especially with cannons placed there. But just the firepower, it's going to disorder. I disorder. Let's see. I take the fire before I disorder, then I'm auto-disordered, which means, I'm not going to rout from that fire probably, although here it would be 2 units firing at me. I wanted that big 8 unit to go in, but I also kind of wanted to shake that situation up a little more than I did, and I wasn't able to. At least I was able to get this hex, and I'm squeezing my way in through here. It doesn't look like whoever the hell that is, Maxwell, is going to be able to hold that position long enough for these guys to get up there. But they're going to be pretty close. This is next turn if Green pushes all his forces as fast as he possibly can. And they're probably pretty safe there. These guys might be a bit of a risk, but they're going to be disordered if they march through the woods. You gotta get Washington out of there. Alright, so this is after the American turn in 440. And you can see they've kind of repulsed the British threat that was developing over here once again. Although here they're really kind of falling apart. But that's okay, because now they have 3 of these, so they'll be getting 2 victory points a turn, and the Brits get none. And we're just way ahead in points. Now, I'll tell you one thing. I'm enjoying myself, which, probably if you watched the first video, you kind of questioned whether I was. And I probably questioned it there too. But, and I find this game somewhat more enjoyable than maybe even some of the GBA-CW type designs with the standard, hex facing and this, that, and the other. But this point vertex hex facing, it generates much, much easier enfilade fire. For example, I can't create a little circle of units, which was something that had happened here, without presenting enfilades all over the place. I can't create like a wrapped line or anything like that, which you would be able to in minis. So, at least under most systems, most of them you don't have to rigorously maintain things in little clumps that can get shot in the flanks, which is what these counters kind of represent. The only game, even the front hex facing games have this problem to some extent, but I find it much, much worse when my lines have to, have to point towards a vertex instead. It's just much, much harder to create a safe zone at the end of the line. And of course you can refuse your flanks and stuff like that. That does a good deal, maybe some echelon type maneuvering, although that still opens up these weird enfilade positions in the middle of your line that, I don't know. It just seems to me that there should be something that protects your line a little better. And in general, you're able to get those enfilades by presenting potential enfilades for yourself. But if you win the race there and get lucky and drive the other guy out, you don't have to worry about it really. Anyway, that's the one thing that I kind of don't know if I like or dislike about this particular game, but it feels very, very chaotic in comparison to, say, my Napoleonic or Civil War stuff that tends not to have point facing. And, it feels like the rigidity of the hex row and of the counter facing and everything is just too strong to adequately cover all the circumstances that forces actually, we're faced with and we're able to react to. If I've got a dangling flank, I should be able to protect it. And this system doesn't have rules like that. It's a fairly simple system, but I don't remember rules like that in Labatt either that allowed you to like refuse a flank safely without exposing. I mean, I don't know. Let me see. If I place like this. So here's the problem. If I place like this, oh look, enfilade fire coming in here. If I place like this, obviously. If I place like this, oh look, enfilade fire here. There's no way to refuse that flank safely that I can find. And I find that makes these designs somewhat ridiculous in my view. Even in linear formations, you still had some capability to keep the line solid and bend it a little bit, just so that you weren't presenting that easy fire opportunity that would cause more havoc. And it's a big deal in this. Enfilading is really the only way that you get good results with normal units firing on each other. I'm also finding myself somewhat unhappy with how hard it is to shock combat. The rules that I was playing with, without worrying about that initial, that defensive fire bonus that came from it, it seems like you've got a far faster reload and refire rate than most other games of this nature. Because, hey, I've already suffered my defensive fire before I go into the shock, right? Why am I facing yet another fire when the shock combat itself is us both firing at each other? Yeah, I know, I'm charging that last bit. That should kind of be baked into the table if it's going to be anywhere. And it isn't. It's clear you can't use this table without that defensive fire, but that defensive fire feels like a little too much. But maybe not, I don't know. But it definitely is enough to prevent shocks from being the effective tactic that we saw the British use them for. And I think what that means is this is a damn hard game for the Brits to win. The Brits' big advantage was being able to plow in with their big morale advantage here and do a lot of damage. And with that, I was getting sub-historical results for them. Yeah, sure, maybe I'm doing things poorly, whatever. When, in terms of how far I was able to chase the Americans back, and that was not only not taking the first fire into effect, but it was also not taking into effect some of the advantages that the Wids provided defensively for shock combat. I don't know how much that affected things. I think there were a couple of combats that were. But yeah, I mean, and now looking at it where they just are trading shots, man, especially once they get into the woods, those Continentals can just trade shots all day. The only way to get them out of a place is even the normal line, in the clear, they're able to show quite a bit of resilience, and the only way to get them out was to just charge the fuckers. And close range British fire was much, much more effective, because if you look at how the fire chart works, we're up here, the most we're going to get is usually a morale check or a disorder. Which means, say you split them evenly or whatever, there's, a chance of a rout happening, but it's not a very high one. And there's a chance of some casualties if you get the disorder first and get another disorder, or if you get the morale check. If you get a morale check that causes disorder. But the big advantage here was these units didn't have a lot of capability to stand, and the recovery rate isn't that good with Lee on the field. Although with these other leaders showing up, wow, they're a little bit better. Even though but here's the difference. Lee has really the best of the, with the advanced guard, the best of the brigade commanders. Most of the brigade commanders here, these are all like 1-0s except for this guy. These guys about split between 1s and 0s and 2 1s. So between Wayne, Scott, and Lafayette, you had a lot of reasonably decent leaders, especially Wayne and Lafayette, who help recover the points. Of course, the leader themselves can recover the stack they're in, but that's sometimes hard to arrange them to be in the stack that's routed. All right, that's a lot of chattering. Let's get on with the British turn. The end is in sight. I hope Agnew's brigade would be powerful coming in here. It isn't showing itself to be terribly so, and the time's passing. These guys are going to be in position pretty soon, and we're just not going to get the breakthrough there. Over here, yeah, we sent Scott running through the woods. One of his guns sitting there ready to be captured. We'll grab those actually because we shot them, so we can march on them. I'm trying to see if there's anywhere else I want to try to use cold steel, and nowhere really comes into mind. So these guys, we'll grab these guys though. That seems like a good idea. Okay, so this is after the colonial turn. Oh crap, except I forgot to do these fires, which are of some importance. And then I jumped forward and started doing some of the British stuff, but I completely forgot about these guys. Let me come back after I resolve them and try to figure out what the hell it all means. So those Brits who were caught here slipped away without any harm, as far as I can tell. There might have been a need to trigger fire here, but the problem is, because of the way the reciprocal fire works, you don't really control what order the fires take place in, like you vaguely do, but they're going to come down a line, and you can skip units if you want, but that's generally kind of a bad thing. This unit would have had, with the enfilade, more of a chance of maybe causing a casualty or something, but for the most part, even though he's stuck here, he could get away, and then he routed further because nobody could rally him. So he pretty much slips away with no damage. Great, huh? Because he was kind of holding the line up there. So anyway, the British goal, build a line up here, some artillery back here that's going to unlimber if it doesn't get overrun first, and try to hold the line here. Push hard here in the forest. I don't know how hard, but these guys look weak. Maybe they'll go flying back, and I'll be able to get into here and start enfilading these guys. Right now I'm not pushing against them. I'm just really kind of holding off, using artillery fire, etc., to see if I can get an edge there. But that doesn't tend to work unless your opponent chooses to come charging you. The artillery is just not that potent a firing thing. But I'm getting no traction by pushing forward. I'd like to at least get rid of that gun and maybe clean up the line a little bit and see if I can push forward. Basically, if I can catch him in a corner, in a pincer type movement, maybe something good will happen. I'll get some enfilade shots or something, but they'll be from disordered units firing out of the woods. This is the only light infantry over there. There's another one kicking around over here. So it really depends on how much I open that all out. Right then, what I wanted to say, I forgot. If this was in a post game, I'd call it here, or at least offer to call it, because it's really kind of pointless at this point. I tend to play things out to the bloody end when I'm videoing them, at least. I often did solo otherwise, but I think I've gotten worse about, or more likely to play them out for longer. I don't know why. We can see the stalemate up here continues. Over here, hey, we got a wall in the way, and we are making some progress here. I didn't want to go all out, mainly because the units that I hit in the flank, where it's actually maybe worth meleeing them because they might break before you hit them, and you don't get shot at coming in and all kind of stupid stuff like that. Well, you would in a lot of these cases, but those disappeared already. So I'm going to hold off and just see whether or not I can shove enough back to present a threat to these guys before the game ends. I don't think that I can win the game as the Brits. I'm kind of demoralized. I'm kind of demoralized, and if I had an easy way to get out of here, which historically is kind of what they decided eventually, I would. But, you know, I got until the end of the day, so I guess I just keep fighting on. 20 turn was skipped due to heat. This, right now we're paused just before the Union, or, yeah, there we go. Just before the Continental fire phase. I wanted to show it because this shows kind of the extent of their line at this point. They've got a nice little formation over here that's threatening. I got some artillery here to duel. The heat turn worked out pretty nicely for both sides. Both sides got a fair amount of recovery, but again, it's better for the Colonials, I think, just because they're more likely to have tons of units that they have less capability, especially early in the game, but even now, to recover all their units because Lee's so lousy. See, we're creating a blockage here at the middle morass. That's not going anywhere. Over here, the new troops are in. I just really don't see things moving much. It's just whether there's a few more casualties before the end comes and the British march away in defeat. Roll into 6 p.m. Jeez. Or more screw-ups. For one thing, I forgot to mention, there is a retreat fire. It's just, again, it's hard to see in the rules. All that bold print, whatever. The way that I read rules is a very skimmy type method. It works really, really well on the old SPI rules. It works really well on Dean Essex rules. It works pretty well on Victory Game stuff, although I'd have a harder time tackling that now probably. But when you start putting too much distraction on the page, it starts failing. That's why I don't buy books that are highlighted, you know. I'd rather buy a clean book because that stuff, and I don't highlight because that stuff actually just makes it harder for me to remember what's going on. It's just the way my brain's wired. And harder to see and understand even. I vaguely remembered seeing these rules, but I couldn't for the life of me find them, so I just gave up. But yeah, they're there, which means some of the retreats that I did that were without penalty. I looked it up actually on the one here where the guy was surrounded, and yeah, that's where I found it, even though that's where I was last complaining. And then I forgot to mention anything. But here the big screw up was I forgot to do the artillery fire. I had to walk away and answer an email or something. And yeah, I'm in that like pre-work period where I have my email open and I'm like, oh, I got to take care of this today. And so I went back and did them afterwards. I don't think it's too big an effect, but yeah. The British advance along here, though, largely was repulsed. And over here, well, the Continentals have been kind of brushed back as well. Oh, we had our first casualty, our first leader casualty, Dickerson or whatever, over here. He's been put onto his reduced side, so he no longer provides a morale bonus nor an automatic rally or anything. Whatever he's stacked with will rally. General Lee will probably be able to rally the routing unit, but you know he's got a low number of activations, so stuff over here is going to be kind of also troubled. And well, we're entering the last column of Continentals coming on board. I just don't see much happening here. The point spread is quite high. It's 85 to 66 now. That's like about 20 points. If we look here at the 20-point variant in favor of the Colonials, that's going to be a decisive victory. Remember, it's skewed so that the first 10 points in favor of the Brits are just in the draw range, or actually in a continental marginal victory. I don't see how the Brits are able to do terribly well in this, but you know, whatever. I mean, so far, I think almost every game has been a continental victory. I can remember one where they were fighting back here, but I don't think they could maintain it long just because the number of continentals they come in put such a threat on being surrounded. And once you're surrounded, really terrible things happen because it's just so easy to get enfilade shots. There's nowhere to retreat to, this, that, and the other. I mean, it should be pretty awful. So you fall back instead of having that happen. Brits managed, this is what, 6:20 starting. Brits managed to get some enfilading fire, break up some of the attack here, or some of the attempts to outflank over here. I did have to dispatch Cornwallis down here though, and that's going to cause me some problems because that leaves Erskine up here. He's sort of the perfect guy to do that. However, since I'm not really pushing here, maybe that'll be okay. And it did get rid of a possible threat. Over here I kind of pushed harder. And you can see I'm lined up to push here, but with Cornwallis heading down this way, I can't reach it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which means I can't really push through the woods. I could send 1 or 2 individual units now. This was one of them. I have my light infantry kind of trudging through the woods, which is somewhat better. Here, Agnew pushes through as hard as he can. No melees, but and maybe I should. It's just, jeez, taking that fire first, that could mean losses because I'm disordered units. I'd rather just exchange fire, I guess. I don't know. I got a better chance of surviving that, I think. It's not like I'm going to make up the point differential. You can see this is really taxing the countermix. Not only am I out of, oh, I have a couple left, the route disorder markers and have these blue things all over, but a while back I started pulling out some 3-dog number markers in order. And the advantage of them is they don't look or feel anything like the ones that come with the game. Obviously, if you've got, Wellington's Victory or TSS or any of the other big things, you've got plenty of counters for it. But it is kind of a pain in the butt to dig out your number counters, especially, one of my thoughts here had been, I was planning on just bringing my magazine games with me when I moved here, because, that's plenty to play for, the year or two that I'm going to be. Well, it didn't work out that way. I had a lot more truck than I expected. Thought I was going to make it up in like an SUV or something. I don't know, but I ended up renting a big truck. So they wouldn't let me rent a cargo van. And not a big truck. The smallest moving van that I can take across state, but still more than I wanted to do so. Anyway, so I have other things around. But if I had not had, so many of my games around, it would have been a problem. If you throw one of these in your suitcase for a business trip or something and think, well, I can play it while I'm out. Yeah, that's not going to work very well with a lot of these magazine games because they do really skimp on some of the counters. Anyway, that's about the best thing I can say right now, I guess. Just because the game's so much in a state of winding down. The outcome is so assured. Why do I keep playing? Yeah, I don't know. Because it's only 4 more turns. Why not? I don't know. Yeah, that's like the rest of today probably in terms of, because I don't play straight through. And it is very fatiguing at this point too. When you've got the line snaking this way, it's not like TSS where you're just like, okay, I'll roll some dice, chuck, and get some firing. You have to be tracking where along the line you are with both sides. And it's a lot more mechanically annoying. And somebody brought up that, the system was kind of designed for Wellington's Victory, and that may make a difference. Yeah, it does, only because you've got, a single linear situation. Here you've got a little bit more maneuver and everything. But honestly, the real problem doesn't come from that. It comes from just tracking where in the line you are. even here where we've got a pretty linear situation in play now, it's I'm less likely to lose my place completely and forget about a little patch of units, but I could see that happening in Waterloo too. So I don't know. So this game actually has one significant difference that I didn't notice, didn't remember, from the Wellington's victory system. It's almost the same in many ways, but the reciprocal fire phases are lodged in each player's turn. And I assume the fire combat tables are somewhat less effective here. I didn't check that actually, I probably should. But I looked at my Ney versus Wellington rules. Somebody pointed out that in Wellington's victory, there's one combined fire phase in between both players' turns. Now, that used to be something that bugged the shit out of me in Ney versus Wellington, and that's kind of the discussion we were having, is that that doesn't really work anywhere outside of this sort of static one person attacking the ridge at Waterloo. So I didn't quite catch that because I was thinking in Monmouth terms, but I looked at my Ney versus Wellington rules, and yeah, they have that single fire phase, mutual fire phase in the game turn in between the two player turns, whereas in Monmouth, we have the reciprocal fire phases embedded in a player's turn, and then so both players have that. And that used to be something that bugged the shit out of me in Ney versus Wellington, because it isn't a static battle along one line where one person's clearly the attacker. It's a somewhat more interesting situation in a lot of ways. And what it ended up doing was giving a real disadvantage, I think, to the French in terms of the gameplay, and probably was less applicable. It's funny because Ney versus Wellington always gets really good ratings, and I always felt like, wow, I don't understand why this game works the way it does, and it seems funky and weird. And now I'm beginning to see, or beginning to remember at least this one complaint I had about it, which was that embedded, that fire phase not embedded in the player turns, but sitting between them, so that one player got, there was an asymmetry as to how the player turns actually were. Here you do not have that. Here there's room for maneuver. One player or the other can take the offensive. Let me look at the combat charts and see how different they are. Actually, charts are significantly different with, this is the Wellington's victory system charts, I guess. I can't find my copy. I may not have brought it with me. Or it may be buried somewhere, or just the hideous box, because I have the TSR box, era box, just completely turns me off being able to even see it. But yeah, the different target classes, the results are given in numerical. Here it's all this push-based thing, and it makes sense that they'd be different. Certainly, combat is very different between the linear techniques used, still although modified, in the Revolutionary era, or in the Revolutionary War, and those used later in the Napoleonic era. So that makes a lot of sense that those would be different. Let's take a look at how big a difference the melee chart is. I think that's probably closer. It looks similar. It's not exactly the same though. For example, 50% here. We have less casualties at high morale levels, etc. So, yeah, there's a little tweaking done across the board on this. But, so this is not an exact port of the system. Normal loud truck wakes me up around 3 o'clock, 3:30 or so. Come in and did a little bit this time. In this case, the Continental Line reformed all the way through here, but then the Brits gaped it over here, cut things here again. Basically, those colonial troops are just, once they're disordered, they're basically just dead meat. They just turn and run every time they get fired at. You gotta hold them back and reform them completely, unlike the Brits. But the thing is, there might be limited firing opportunities, and if you don't get the lucky 5 or 6 or whatever on the shot that you get at this kind of long range, well, then they don't run, right? You gotta get some kind of effect on the chart to actually get them moving. And it really doesn't look like much is going to change here. We've got Poor moving over here. Got himself some Enflod fire over there on the middle morass. If I can break through there and kind of get a little bit of surrounding, I've loosened Maxwell up to go play in that area, because I got these troops coming in to replace the reserve that I got rid of. The Brits maybe see an opportunity where if I push, hey, maybe I can get through, but the woods really break up our attack there. Down to 640, and this is where the game gets kind of silly. The Brits take advantage of enfilade shots. Well, the Colonials are going to be able to hit the Brits with enfilade. It swings that way continuously, like back and forth. Somebody's getting somebody in the flank. It just does not feel appropriate to me. And sure, you don't have to take these attacks, but the Brits are kind of in the, well, you know, we have the slight advantage in terms of quality, etc., and we're going to move forward with it. I don't see anywhere where I want to rush forward. You can see, though, I've kind of cleared a hole here. Again, busted things up there, but it's probably not enough. The British Army is beaten up enough that they don't have the oomph that they had at the beginning, and then also there's some artillery in the Colonial line, like here, which gets to plink at you, even though it's disordered now. It gets to plink every time we go forward, and I mean, it wasn't when they charged forward. That's why there's a routed unit there and stuff like that. Right then, I think I'm going to call this. I've made it halfway through the 640 turn, and quite simply, it's just not worth the effort any longer. At this point, we're talking about some long-range fire, a little bit of artillery sniping, little places where there's, here we're going to be lighting this guy up from behind, but little places where there's some little fire causing units to fly back. It's really just a mechanical exercise. What we saw here, the Brits got pushed back by the artillery during their move. I really don't think anybody's going to push the engagement any further than it is, and because everybody's kind of settled down into these nice little defensive lines. The Brits admit to themselves they have no chance of overcoming the victory point deficit that they've got. The Continentals are going to get a couple more points here. It's 99 to 75. You know, if anything, the difference is accelerating, just because the British forces are worn out enough that their morale isn't so hot either. Yeah, most of the Continental morale is really lousy, but that doesn't really mean a whole hell of a lot, because it's whether or not you can get a D or an R result when you fire, which is really largely a matter of luck. The British firepower is a little better, but so many units are disordered already, which is why the D's and R's are important. That it doesn't make much difference. And if all you get is an M, which is the most likely result, you just send them flying back again. So basically what I'm looking at is, yeah, it takes about, I don't know, 30 minutes or so at least to play a turn, probably closer to an hour, once all these pieces are on the board. And it's just too damn tedious a system to keep going with it. We saw what I usually see with this, which is that the Brits have a real uphill climb to try to win this game. I may have seen them pull it off once, twice, maybe. And I don't know, I haven't played it all that many times. I don't play anything that many times, these little tactical things. But it used to go through my cycle, and I probably got a half dozen plays out of it, at least. Maybe more like a dozen, actually, given how old it is and how long it's been in my collection. Yeah. But yeah, the system, and looking at it here, it reminds me, you know what? I did figure out Ney versus Wellington to the extent that I could play it as well as I can play this, or just about anything. I believe. I may have been a little fuzzy and not used Cav as much as I liked, but man, the tediousness of the firepower system here. Now, maybe it's not as bad in, where there's actual casualties happening. Maybe the pushing each other around is what's wrong, but I really don't remember it like hitting on all cylinders for me, which is a real shame because it's a game that a lot of people very much respect. And I kind of look at it and say, gosh. Now, this one I enjoy more for the first half. After the first half, it starts becoming too tedious, and also you're no longer seeing as much of an interest. The English do not have the capability to punch their way through if they've been doing their job earlier. So really the question is how hard and how fast can they push the Continentals back? And so far they haven't been able to do it painfully enough in games that I've seen played, whatever. For me to think that this is at all balanced, but that's life. All right, I guess we'll send this up and come back with a review after I clean this stuff up. I don't know what. I think we're going to be doing GDW's Double Star next. Can't do anything too big, and I don't think I'll mind if I have to clean that up mid-game.